This is Join Us in France, episode 288. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and on today's episode, let's talk about French immersion programs in France. I'll be chatting with Janice Chung, who has visited France many times and taken several of these courses, so it's really helpful to hear her compare them. I also talked to Kathy Stanford, who came for courses related to her university and has made lifelong friends in France due to her immersion classes. We also mention the DELF test briefly. This is a test designed to establish your level of French proficiency. I know a lot of you are working on learning French, and I think it's wonderful. I often get asked, can I learn French easily? Yes, go back to age 7 and move to France at that age. Not only will you learn to speak fluently, but you will not have an accent in either language. But for the rest of us, it's a lot of work. I was born and raised in France. I did not learn my first word of English until I was 11. I always had perfect grades in English. Woo! So I figured English was a piece of cake. But when I moved to London at age 21, I was utterly lost. It took me a few weeks to start feeling comfortable. I've been working on my English ever since, and you can still tell I'm not native. So keep at it. The more time you spend in French immersion programs, the better you'll get. But don't expect miracles. It's hard work. And I also want to say that if you're just coming to France as a visitor and you'll just be visiting Paris and other places like that are popular with tourists, you won't need much French. Get comfortable with saying bonjour, merci, au revoir. That's all you'll need. I have a good friend who lives in America and teaches French. She's French born and raised. I met her in college where we were both teaching French, but she's continued on that trajectory ever since. Last time she was visiting me in France, we talked about organizing a French immersion week in the Toulouse countryside with French classes in the morning, local visits in the afternoon, cooking classes some days. I know just the place where we could do it. It's quite idyllic. It has accommodations on the premises, a big, beautiful French kitchen, a pool, the perfect terrace for apéritif. It's a great venue, and the owner is an amazing cook who specializes in the cuisine of the Southwest. But we were going to do it this year in 2020. But now that we've had the pandemic, obviously it fell through. And I'm not sure how much interest there would be in doing something like that. At the earliest, it would be for the spring or early summer of 2021. So if that would be of interest to you, reach out and let me know. I think it could be a hoot. I will start putting together a list of possible people who are interested. Email annie@joinusinfrance.com and let me know that you're interested in a French immersion program in the Toulouse area. As always, you'll hear my personal update after the interview, and I'm really excited that Join Us in France was featured in a couple of widely published magazines. So if this is your first time listening because you read about it in those magazines, I want to say bienvenue to you. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/288, the number 288. And on this page, also add recommendations for language schools in France from folks from the Facebook group that didn't get mentioned in the interview. And there are a lot of choices for you. Bonjour, Janice, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Bonjour, Annie. It's so nice to speak to you again.
Lovely indeed, and it's our fourth time talking. You're a regular.
Yes, I just love France so much and talking about it. So thank you for having me on again.
That's right. Okay, so today I want to make sure that everybody understands we're talking about taking immersion classes, French immersion classes in France, which I've never done, obviously, because I'm French. But you've been a teacher your whole life, right?
Yes.
And a school principal. It's your career. Now you're retired, but schools, you've thought about it your whole life. So your opinion probably should matter a little bit more than other people's opinion, I think.
Well, it certainly makes you realize what makes a good teacher and what makes a not so good learning experience.
Right. And you wrote about this on your blog called France Travel Tips. And this particular article is called What to Expect When You Take a French Immersion Course in France. And we're going to recap all of that pretty much. But there will be a link in the show notes for this episode if you want to find it easily and read it.
Super.
So do tell us about your 3 experiences.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the one that I keep returning to.
That's good.
And there are many reasons why. And it's called École des Trois Ponts. And it's located west of Lyon. How I found it, I don't know. I mean, this was many years ago when the internet wasn't quite as powerful. And I had such a great experience taking classes, living there. I don't want to call it a campus because it was like a large house with then a separate area with rooms with bathrooms, bed, that kind of thing, and a desk. But all the meals, basically 24/7, you were speaking French. Mm-hmm. And it was a great community. There were only about maximum 12 students, and we were in different classes based on your level. But the fact that you were living there and you were totally immersed, as I'll explain with the other schools I've been to, I was off campus, so to speak. But to live there, so you wake up in the morning, you have breakfast, and you're speaking French.
It's all in French.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really good.
And then you have 3 hours of classes in the morning, and then you go for lunch, and you're speaking French.
Right.
And then in the afternoon, you would be perhaps doing homework, or in the case of some of my other visits there, I might do cooking classes or countryside walks. Mm-hmm. And the last time I was there in May, we actually did an excursion. I joined in with a group, and we went to a chateau for lunch.
Oh, that's very nice. And the whole time, was it a rule that you had to speak French the whole time?
I don't want to use a strong word as rule, but it was expected that you would try as much as possible to speak French. And, of course, we slipped out of it. Sure. Sometimes you weren't scolded or anything, but for example, if I couldn't think of a word, I'd go, like bookings. And because I just couldn't figure it out. And you get tired sometimes of looking up words. Yeah. Translations. So
this is the one you would recommend on, above all.
I love it. I mean, I have made friends with other students, teachers. What I really liked about this, besides being totally immersed, is that they really centered it around the students' needs. We were talking about education. Mm-hmm. And to use a term that I used in education, it's student-centered. Mm-hmm. So if a student was having difficulty in something, the teacher might develop a lesson centered around that.
Wow.
As compared to some other schools where they follow the book and they don't deviate.
Right. So how many different teachers do they have for the 12 students?
They might have 3. They might have 4. It just depends. I mean, the classes I've been in, sometimes there were 4 students. Sometimes there were 5. Sometimes, I think on average it was about 4 to 6. It was nice. Because.
And at what kind of level do you think these full immersion classes are most helpful?
There were beginners who had been there for weeks. I was so impressed by some people who had been there, this is my 3rd week. And I'm like, your 3rd week? And they would say, I started as a beginner. Uh-huh. And now I'm much more fluent. And they had done very well.
Well, that's great.
What happens is when you register online, you take a short test. But it's when you arrive the morning of your first day, full day, you have a test, quote unquote, with one of the teachers. And they try to better evaluate what level you're at. Mm-hmm. So and then they place you in a class. And I've been properly placed every time, so I've been very happy about that.
That's great. All right, so let's talk about the other schools that you've tried.
Sure. So in Montpellier, I rented an apartment and took classes at Accent Français. And it was the same type of thing where every day you went for a couple of hours. Mm-hmm. And like École des Trois Ponts, it was perhaps not quite as student-centered, but there were games, there were activities. You paired up with other people. So it was a whole variety of activities. Mm-hmm. I would go back there. I think the hard part was living off-site, and everybody did. They either had homestays or they were renting apartments or whatever. Uh-huh. You didn't get quite the immersion that you would at École des Trois Ponts, where everybody's there.
Right. You don't speak for so many hours in a day.
Right. I did enjoy it, but one thing I should point out, and this is for your listeners when they're looking into courses, there was a whole variety of different nationalities. And when they were speaking French, their accents affected their pronunciation.
Right.
So I actually had a difficult time sometimes understanding the other students.
Right.
When I attended, there were about 10 students in the class. Mm-hmm. Not too big, but certainly bigger than the other one. And we did an excursion at the end. The teacher was very supportive, but I perhaps was put in a class that was a bit too hard for me. I mean, my weakness, which like a lot of people's, is oral comprehension. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's tough for them too to decide because you're reading and writing, and speaking might be very strong.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's usually what comes last when you learn a language as an adult is the comprehension, oral comprehension. Yeah. The written stuff usually goes a little faster because French is not that difficult of a language. I mean,
no. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important for a learner is to take risks, but to be in an environment that encourages risk. Mm-hmm. The third school was Alliance Française, which is world-renowned. Yeah. I've taken many classes in Toronto where I live, and then this was the first time I took it in Paris. And I had a difficult time. I was placed in a class that was too difficult. It's hard to decide because I was only there a week. Do I go and say, you better put me in a different level? The other thing was that there were about 10 to 12 students, and the teacher really responded to only a few students. And as a teacher, you need to encourage all to participate.
Yeah. You need to get some words out of everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I remember speaking to another student, and she said, yeah, she noticed the same thing. So that was a little discouraging. The other thing about Alliance Française, they're highly, highly structured. They follow, I believe, a very set curriculum. Yep. It's very teacher-directed. For educators, we know teacher-directed is basically the Socrates method where you're speaking to the student. Mm-hmm. I mean, certainly there was some, interaction between students, but not as much. Yeah. Not as much as the others.
Well, that's very French. I mean, that's because all of the Alliance Française teachers have to have a certification that they got in France to teach French. And so they think like French people. They think that's what a class should be like.
Right.
So, yeah.
And as a learner, I don't learn best that way. I learn by conversing with other people, by, dialogue back and forth.
Did you ever try phone, kind of like over the phone conversations?
No, I haven't. The only alternative way of learning, I went to a few meetups here in Toronto.
Ah, yeah. But you were talking to other Anglos who wanted to learn French.
Right. Yeah. And, we'd meet in a bar, have conversation. I just found it wasn't deep enough for me. And, you kind of talk about the same thing. Mm-hmm. I also went to some French meetup classes. There was a French teacher. And that was actually fun. But I really do enjoy, obviously I enjoy going to France and learning.
Yes.
It's a little different.
That's the best way to do it. Yeah, I've taught English a lot, but English, not French. And when I do that, I find that the best way is over the phone, because you're one-on-one, and you have to. I'm just quiet, and the student has to say stuff.
That's right.
And so typically I go from a photo on a website, and I ask them to pick a photo, whatever. And then I just say, okay. I ask one question, two questions, and they have to talk. And but it's not very there's hardly any talk about grammar. Right. Afterwards I send them a recap where I say, okay, here's the grammar point. I heard you make that mistake 2 or 3 times. But that's in the written recap. During the conversation, I don't interrupt for nothing. I just keep talking, take notes. Right. So it's a different method, but it works really well with people who are fairly advanced. If you are too new at this, it doesn't work. It's petrifying.
Right. I should consider it.
You might try it.
When I was in France last, I went for 2 months, and fortunately, a number of my Airbnb hosts or the towns I were very small, and no one spoke English. And It was a really great opportunity to challenge myself. Right. And I was really, am I going to improve? And I really felt like I did. And a lot has to do with confidence. Sure. If you can gain your confidence, then you can be more successful.
And another thing you need to do when you're in France and you want to speak French is, instead of taking the train, take a BlaBlaCar or something.
Ah, yes.
Because then you're with a person, and most likely the person won't speak English or not well enough to be comfortable. I mean, you might, I might be driving you, but if it, but otherwise, you will have to speak French. And finding opportunities where it's just not by going to smaller places in France. In Paris, almost everybody speaks English, and people will switch to English. They've done it to me.
Right, and I hate that. It's no, I want to practice my French. Right. When I was in the Ardèche a few years ago, I stayed in a bed and breakfast. And they only spoke French, no English. And I was having problems with my car. So, of course, the good part was I increased my vocabulary on all these terms I had never, But it was fun, because they were enjoying it too, trying to help me understand words and what they were saying.
Yeah. Okay, so let's recap. Your top choice is École des Trois Ponts. That's in Riorgues.
Right.
All right, that's not a big town.
Right. I'll tell you, and saying Rouen, I'm probably still not saying it properly.
Rouen?
Yeah, okay, that's better.
Yeah, so that would be a top choice is École des Trois Ponts, then possibly the one in Montpellier called, I forgot. Accent Français. And Alliance Française, not your favorite. Although if you're in the U.S., maybe Alliance Française would be good.
When I took French in school, so through high school. But when I was doing extra, I had some good classes in Toronto. Mm-hmm. So it just depends.
Yeah. And also, I think if you take French from Alliance Française from French people who have been living in the U.S. for a long time, they've probably attended classes in the U.S. and they've caught on that you don't teach in the U.S. the same way you teach in France. Yeah, and so it might be a better experience because they will adapt to the people they're talking to. Whereas the French teachers in France for Alliance, I bet they are square as can be. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've had some good teachers at Alliance Française. It's just the one in Paris.
My husband did Alliance Française in Toulouse and really enjoyed it, but he's very advanced, So it was, as a matter of fact, they were telling him, why are you here? We don't understand. Because he could he could be teaching the grammar. I mean, he really gets French, better than I do. I can't explain French to save my life. I know what's correct, but I don't know why.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, all right. Thank you so very much, Janice. You've been very helpful.
Okay.
And we will talk to you soon on another episode, I'm sure.
Super. Thank you so much, Annie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Bonjour, Caroline, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Bonjour, Annie.
So nice
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
So today we're going to talk about your experience doing language immersion in France. You've had a couple of experiences that were pretty positive for you, weren't they?
They were wonderful, yes.
So tell us about it.
Okay, so when I was 18, my mom and I went to Tours, France for a month, and we studied at the CLA, Centre de Linguistique pour l'étranger. It's a small, intimate school, and they have about 1 or 2 classes per level. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
I had studied French for 4 years in high school, and then they gave me a placement test when I arrived, and they are like, how many years have you studied French for? So I was placed in the beginning level. My mom was an intermediate, and it was great. We both had wonderful small classes between 4 and 10 people.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and people from all over the world. I still talk to people from those classes today, so it was a great experience.
That's great. So was that like more of a university setting or a private school setting?
It was a private school setting. It was in the center of Tours, near Place Plumereau, and it was just almost like a house. And each classroom was probably a different room in the previous house. It was lovely.
And so did you stay there or did you have other accommodations?
So they connected us with a French family that we stayed with. So I love the host family experience because you get the dinners with the family and you get to talk to them, and you get not only the language, but you get a little bit more of the culture and traditions with them.
Sure.
So it was great.
Yeah, that's nice. And so that was a whole month.
Yes, it was a whole month, and it was in the summer, so it was warm, but it was. I was fine. My mom was not so fine. It was funny.
Yeah, it can get hot in France in the summer.
Yes, it was over 40, I think, several days. So.
Wow. Okay, and then your second experience was when and where?
So it was my junior year in college, and it was in Besançon, France. So that's in eastern France, in the Franche-Comté region.
Yeah.
And that was at the Centre de Linguistique Appliquée.
Okay.
And that school was more geared toward intermediate or advanced learners, I would say, and it's much bigger. They have larger classes, but they have a lot more classes as well. And also excellent instructors. So
you were in a class with how many other students?
I mean, probably 10 to 20. It wasn't huge, but it was bigger than the CLA.
Right. And so tell me about how a class goes. Like you show up in the morning and you talk about, I don't know, the news or what? Is it mostly oral or do they give you stuff to read and
it depended on the class. So for these classes, we had different topics. We had grammar, we had literature, we had linguistics. I had one on the European Union, which was super interesting. Films, history. So depending on the class, we would show up and the professor would talk, and then I think they would speak most of the time. The European Union one was definitely more student focused. We had presentations, so we would go do research and then come and maybe even take some field trips and then come back and present to the class about our topic. It was great. I loved it.
So was this aimed at preparing you for an exam, for like the DELF or something?
You could take the DELF, yes. I did not. I was just there to get credits for my major.
Yeah. We should maybe explain what the DELF is.
Do you want to explain that?
Well, I'm not sure I know all about it. My husband took it. So it's a test that puts you on a scale as far as your French proficiency is concerned. And he did it because at the time he was thinking, when we first moved to France, he thought maybe in his spare time he would take university classes. And of course, he never had any spare time to take university classes. But he to be able to enroll as a foreign national, he had to take the DELF and show that he had at least a certain level of proficiency. And so that's why he did it, and he did great. But I remember him telling me when he got home from the exam that it was quite difficult. Like, you really had to be with it or you would do poorly.
Yeah. I never took it, so I don't know exactly, you know, the ins and outs of it. But
Right.
Yeah.
And it's only useful if you're going to, I mean, if you need it for something. You know, I don't know that people who are just have an interest in learning French necessarily need to take it. It's just that it will give them a very objective, you know, assessment, like you said in the previous school, where they were surprised that you had taken French so long in high school. Well, that's often what happens. People say, you know, I've taken French for 4 years in high school, and they can't line two words together.
Yeah, I could barely say bonjour. It was hilarious.
Right.
Right.
So I don't know how they teach French in American high schools, but I haven't been impressed with most of the people who've told me, oh yeah, I took it for years. I'm like, all right, so let's have a conversation. But you know what? It would be exactly the same with French kids learning English. A lot of them take English for years and they can't talk. It's kind of sad.
It's very sad. I know my French teacher, she focused mostly on English grammar, which, you know, is important since we don't really teach it very often anymore to understand before you learn French grammar.
Right.
But at the same time, I didn't learn much French. So.
Right. Yeah, because, I mean, now I have been a teacher. I've taught English and I've taught French too, but that was decades ago when I was a college student in the US. And so they just told me all the things I had to teach, and then I had to teach grammar, right? But I was petrified by grammar because I don't know why we say it this way. I just know that's why we say it. I don't know why.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly.
So when I became an English teacher, I mostly ever took jobs where it was conversation. So if somebody makes the same mistake over and over again, sure, I'll prepare a drill or something and explain the concept. But otherwise, we just talk.
Yes.
Just give them pictures and we talk. And I find it very efficient. Like, you progress faster, I think.
I agree. I mean, I feel like especially once you have a little bit of a base, I think you just need to kind of jump in and go, you know? And you aren't going to learn by not speaking. So
Right. So in Besançon, did you also stayed with, I can't remember, you stayed with a family?
I stayed with the host family for 1 month so I did an exchange through the University of Nebraska, even though I was not a student at the University of Nebraska.
Oh.
Yeah, I was a student. I live in Seattle, so I was a student at Western Washington University, and I chose their university because they offered a host family experience, and then we also got to stay in the university housing for the rest of the time. So I thought that was very interesting, and after having such a great experience with the host family in Tours, I definitely wanted that opportunity a second time. And my university didn't have that, and they were only 3-month programs. I wanted to go for longer.
Right.
So the host family I stayed with in Tours was for the first month while I was there for this intensive language month. It was before the rest of the students came back for the full semester. So our program had a month of intensive language, and then we had 4.5 months of university type classes, more classes similar to what I would take at the university in the U.S. So that first month I lived with my host family, and it was fantastic. I just adore my host mom. She's lovely, and we had dinner together every night. They took me on little side trips. They did all sorts of little quizzes at the table on faux amis and different meanings of the same word. It was very comical.
That's what faux amis is like a word that looks the same in both languages, but it doesn't mean the same in both languages.
Yes, and it was just wonderful. And then for the rest of the time I lived in the university housing, I lived in a dorm, and it was actually really close to my host family. So I would go there once or twice a week and have dinner with her.
Oh, that's nice.
I can't even tell you, she's just wonderful. I just adore her.
That's so cool.
But yeah, the university dorm was smaller than what I had in the US. So it was like a single dorm room. And it was pretty tiny, but I mean, I didn't have a lot with me, so it was fine.
What do you mean that dorm rooms in France are not luxurious?
No. I would say that, I mean, my opinion from living in them, the money is, it's all funded by the government, right? Versus the United States, we pay for it. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
And most of the kids go home on the weekends in France to their families. So it was very quiet on the weekends at the dorms.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really interesting, too, because the weekends are definitely not quiet in the U.S.
Yeah, because my daughter is going to college in Toulouse, and we live near Toulouse. So like you said, but she's not in a dorm, but she comes home every weekend. Mm-hmm. Most of her classmates also do the same. I mean, none of them come from far enough away that they can't drive home for the weekend if they want to.
Yeah. Most of the students their families lived pretty close to Besançon. I feel like people stayed kind of regional for their education.
Yeah, we're not okay, in America, you tell your kids, okay, you're all grown now, go to college on the other side of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And in France, we say, no, stay right here so we can keep an eye on you.
No, I love it. It's just such a sense of community, and it's great.
Okay. So do you have any advice for people who are doing this? What to look out for? What makes for a good program?
So for a good program, I would look for just figure out what your interests are. So I knew I wanted to stay with a host family. That was really important to me. So I narrowed that down. Obviously, price was an issue as well, because, I mean, you could pay anything, right, for a class.
Mm-hmm.
But I would just say, I guess it depends on the region too. So I loved where I was at for both of them. They were both very easy to get to other places. So I could go on the weekends or on a holiday and visit other parts of the country or Europe. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, take advantage of that. You don't need to study all the time. I spent a lot of time studying, but I also took time to go and explore the country, and I found a happy medium. That's
great. Well, I can tell you just said a few words in French, but you sound good. You kept it.
Thank you.
So that's wonderful.
I've been taking some more classes back here at our local college. It's been fun. I just enjoy it.
So when's your next visit to France?
We're going next summer. I'm bringing my 2 boys and my husband.
Excellent.
For 3 weeks in August, which I know is just the worst time. I've never thought I would actually go in August, but it's the only time that works for us. So we're going to go.
Yeah, just air conditioning, okay? Just do
yes.
that for yourselves. That's it.
100%.
Thank you.
I'm super excited.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for being willing to share your experience with international immersion programs.
Oh, thank you so much, Annie. I just love your podcast, and I've listened to most of your episodes. So
wow. Merci. Au revoir.
Merci. Au revoir.
Thank you, Anna Belkina and Gerald Brown, for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. Patrons enjoy several rewards that you'll find listed at patreon.com/join us. These are hard times for all of us. You cannot travel right now, so I really appreciate those of you who are hanging in there with me and make it possible for me to continue doing the podcast. I share exclusive content with my patrons, including help with your French comprehension. That's called Lunch Lunch Break French, stories about France, that's the French History Brief, photos, and membership into a secret Facebook group where I'm going to start posting a lot more because I have a lot of little excursions to take in the next few weeks. And of course, patrons can message me directly through Patreon, and these messages always get top priority. And if you're not sure your itinerary for France is as good as it needs to be, let me review it for you. It'll cost you $50, but we go through the whole thing on the phone, and I send you my custom recommendations in writing. Email Annie@joinusinfrance.com to set that up and write itinerary review in the subject line. And if you've started to plan your trip for Paris for next year, make sure to include some of my voice map audio tours. I'll be updating the one for Ile de la Cité soon because some of the areas that were closed to the public around Notre Dame are now reopening. Go to joinusinfrance.com/audio tours for details. My thanks to Christina and Michael Long for sending in a one-time donation by using the green button on any page on joinusinfrance.com that says Tip Your Guide. Christina wrote, Bonjour, Annie. I discovered your podcast last year for planning our 2019 family trip. Even though we can't visit France right now, and honestly, I'm not planning another trip until 2023 for my 50th birthday, I am loving listening to as many episodes as I can. She put it in all caps. I have even created another spreadsheet for each episode to remember the highlights. My goal is to get through all of them before our 2023 trip. Continued blessings and keep doing what you guys do best. Thank you so much, Christina. And if you'd like to support the show without spending a penny you wouldn't have otherwise, before you go shopping on Amazon, go to the bottom of any page on joinusinfrance.com and click on the Amazon ad. Because you came to Amazon through my site, I get a small commission and it does not cost you a penny more. Same things with the booking.com ad. And thank you so much. And this week, I also want to thank Lachlan Cook and Celeste Letard-Broussard for mentioning how much they enjoyed a specific episode of the podcast on the Facebook group, or wherever you'd like to mention that, as a matter of fact. Because to my great chagrin, many members of the Join Us in France Facebook group, the closed group on Facebook, do not listen to the podcast. I let them in the group anyway because Facebook is a great discovery tool, but it really helps if you let them know about episodes that are particularly helpful or fun to you. Hopefully you influence them to give it a try themselves. For my personal update this week, I'm very excited to report that this podcast was featured in 2 publications. The AARP magazine was one of them. I'll have a link in the show notes for both of those. And thank you, Terry Ward, for reaching out and including Join Us in France in your article. The second one is France Amérique magazine. Thank you, Colette Williams, for letting me know about that. The France Amérique author wrote, while a transatlantic trip may not be an option for most, planning for the day when it will be is a pleasure in its own right. Armchair travelers will find few better resources than Join Us in France, where hosts Annie and Elise serve up a wealth of info with good humor and zero pretension. The more than 280 episodes to date include debriefs with recent visitors to regions all over the country. I like that, debrief. That's an excellent word. I should use it. With tips on dealing with food allergies, having a baby, or buying a house in France, going to Paris solo, with preschool children, or with teenagers, and the list goes on and on. Guestless episodes cover an equally broad range of topics, among them restaurants' do's and don'ts, bizarre French foods, Le Corbusier architecture, movie recommendations, and yes, post-pandemic travel. Thank you, France Amérique. Thank you very much. That's a very kind review. I'm not much for political commentary normally, but I just want to say this. We're all a little bit racist. Yes, you and me too. It's human nature. Americans are racist against blacks and Mexicans. French people are racist against North Africans. Germans are racist towards Turks. The English are racist towards Pakistanis. Light-skinned black people are racist against dark-skinned black people. Latinos are racist against black people. I am sure Asians have their targets too. Is there a country in the world that doesn't have a group to be racist against? We need to be on the lookout for our own racist impulse, acknowledge it, look at it for the ugly thing that it is, and stop it. And because racism is such a natural, can you hear the quotes? Natural part of human life, and I might remind you that arsenic is natural too, and we do know to stay away from it, we might think that it's normal to support policies and politicians who stick it to the groups we don't like. But that's both wrong and counterproductive. And while we can't fix every wrong in the world today with a magic wand, there are some things we can do to push things in the right direction. You know what surprised me when I moved home to France after spending 16 years in America? We have a lot of social workers in France. These are people paid by the taxpayers to help folks who are in difficulty. I wondered if that wasn't wasteful when I first moved to home to France. But I've come to realize that it's not. There are people in the world who need help, and when we help them, we're all better off. We all sleep better at night. I don't know. Yeah. The other thing I noticed is that French cops aren't near as badass as American cops. They drive little French cars. They don't wear scary gear. When you talk to them, they're actually nice. What a joke, I thought. These people should be tougher. But then, we don't have much crime in France, so maybe they are doing something right. And you know, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, that we have a lot of protests in France, and some of them have turned violent. It's unsettling and frightening. Sometimes I understand why people are protesting. Sometimes I think the protesters are unreasonable. However, using military-like weapons and tactics against civilians never works out. It's been tried, and it's both wrong and counterproductive. I'm using that phrase a lot today. Protesters have a right to be heard, and we should listen to them. We have a lot of practice at being patient towards protesters in France, and we know from trial and error that patience is the only thing that works. And listening to them too. Trying to figure out why they are protesting. Because I'm French by birth and American by choice, I get to vote in 2 countries, and I rarely miss a vote in either one. I am not so naive to think that voting fixes everything or that my favorite candidate will win every time. But when only half of eligible voters show up to vote in America, politicians know they only have to keep their base happy. Are they wrong about that? The only way you have to prove them wrong is by voting. So do it. I'd like to recommend a book to you, dear listeners. It's called Waking Up White by Debbie Irving. That was so eye-opening for me. When you're born white, you don't realize how easy you've had it all these years. And if you happen to be a white male, it's even easier. And if you're white, male, tall, and good-looking, that's the jackpot. Pretty in general helps, doesn't it? Theoretically, we're all created equal, but in reality, we are not. That's why we need social workers and friendly cops. A solid and affordable healthcare system for all is also an important piece of that pie because we are not created equal in terms of health either. In happier news, the COVID-19 pandemic seems to be abating in France. I don't want to sound too optimistic because it could start up again, but France started reopening in stages on May 11th, and it's June 6th as I record this, and so far, so good. The number of new infections is still going down everywhere, even in the Paris region. In my department, there were about 10 new cases reported each week of the last few days. Health authorities would like to test 100,000 people every day in France. They usually can't find that many who will take the test. But nationwide, we're between 1 and 1.5 4% of positives, and we have excess testing capabilities at this time. Once this system got its behind in gear, it worked. It really works. COVID-19 emergency room visits only account for 1% of the visits and about 4% of the workload at most hospitals. People are actually going back to see doctors for cancers and arthritis and all sorts of problems besides the pandemic. The numbers all look good in France, and the epidemic is definitely calming down here. I know it's not the case everywhere in the world, sadly, and it's very slow to bring these numbers down because we started the lockdown in the middle of March, so it's been 9 weeks, and we're finally seeing some breathing room. Yeah, that's the right term for this. Borders between European countries will reopen between June 15th and July 1st. I'm hearing conflicting stories about this, so I don't want to be too sure of what I'm saying. I think there will be an announcement on June 15th or soon after about opening European borders to the rest of the world. Countries like Greece are in a big hurry to start their tourist season. And because they had so little COVID-19, they are rearing to go. Are they going to regret letting in all these tourists? I don't know. But when I find out solid information about reopening of borders, I'll post it on Facebook and Twitter. Follow Join Us in France on Facebook and at Paris Podcast on Twitter. I'll also talk about it on episode 290 to be released on June 21st. But of course, I do an update every week on Sundays on the episode. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Have a great week of trip planning. And yes, you can start planning your next trip to France now. It is time. Merci. I'll talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2020 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.